Despite the family-friendly image YouTube has nowadays, the site is home to a vast selection of horror content. Since the beginning, there have been videos about the expected mediums, like horror games and horror movies, but there have also been many videos about things much more unique to the internet, from creepypastas, to analog horror, to just plain old weird videos. There's a plethora of content here, but there's one genre of horror that's almost synonymous with YouTube that I left out. Alternate reality games, or ARGs as they're more commonly referred to. Now yes, ARGs do not have to be horror, and they don't even have to be on YouTube. I'll be going into that a bit later, but for now, I want to explain what an ARG even is. Alternate reality games are a type of content that take place in fiction, but act as though they take place in the real world. If this sounds familiar to you, it's because this is very similar to the concept behind found footage horror movies, like the Blair Witch Project. ARGs commonly require the players to solve puzzles, which might be as simple as solving a code, or as complex as going outside and looking for clues in the real world. The hardest challenge of all for gamers. What I'll be talking about here today, though, is what the majority of YouTube ARGs are. That being horror-focused unfiction. Unfiction is simply another term for ARG, although ARGs specifically refer to unfiction with the game elements, such as solving codes. Okay, you got all that? Good. Now, as I was saying, most ARGs on YouTube are in the horror genre, though, strangely, they aren't really around anymore. Alternate reality games were everywhere in the late 2000s and early 2010s, but around the mid-2010s, things changed. ARG analysis channels became hugely popular, and much like creepypastas before them, ARGs became something that everybody was creating, in hopes of being featured on one of those said channels. And then, it all stopped. I don't really know when or why, but at some point, ARGs just vanished. Maybe it was just because I stopped caring as much about them, but I feel like if that was the case, I would have still at least heard about them. But for a few years, it really seemed like ARGs were dead, with analog horror replacing it. But now, there does seem to be a bit of a resurgence going on, which I'll be discussing later. In order to find out what exactly happened to the genre, I watched 6 different alternate reality games here on YouTube from across the past 15 years. However, I will be discussing more than those 6 series, as I want this video to be more of a brief history of the medium, so there will be a few more ARGs that I bring up, if only briefly. I'll be starting off by discussing the pre-YouTube era, but before that, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps me out. But without further ado, this is Before we get into the spooky stuff, I want to go a little more in-depth on what ARGs were before YouTube. This is when we got what I like to call corporate ARGs, since the ones I'm about to discuss were all made as advertisements for various pieces of media. First, we have what is often considered the very first ARG, that being The Beast. I had actually never heard about it until I started researching for this video. This was a promotion for the movie AI, Artificial Intelligence, and was a elaborate murder mystery, and there was absolutely more depth than that, but since there's very limited information on The Beast, that's about all I can say concretely. The Beast paved the way for more companies to promote their products with similar methods, most famously with the Halo 2 I Love Bees ARG, which was the first ARG with real-world elements, and the Why So Serious ARG for The Dark Knight, which was meant to bridge the gap between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. I won't be going in depth on either of those for the sake of time, But much like the Beast, most progression in these ARGs was tied to puzzles and ciphers on websites. Though, as I already said, I Love Bees did contain some real-world elements, such as answering payphones. Finally, there's Year Zero, which was promotion for the Nine Inch Nails album of the same name, though interestingly it was less promotion and more companion piece, as it was made for the sake of art, at least according to Nine Inch Nails frontman Trent Reznor. Now, all of these ARGs were created in the early 2000s, with The Beast being created in 2001, I Love Bees being created in 2004, and Why So Serious and Year Zero being created in 2007. Now, YouTube did exist during the run of those last two, as what I would consider to be the first two independent ARGs, or unfiction series, were both created in 2006, but it wasn't until a few years later that they really got started. I'll be going over those two aforementioned series briefly, as they really are more unfiction than alternate reality game, since they don't have many puzzles, at least as far as I'm aware. Lonely Girl 15 was the first independent unfiction series to be put on YouTube. It starts off seemingly as normal vlogs, but eventually reveals a much deeper story. The Human Pet followed a few months later, containing a story much more similar in tone to the series that would follow it. And I really do not know how much of this I can talk about without being demonetized. The Human Pet was so edgy that the channel was deleted from YouTube, and although a new channel was eventually created, it does seem like the project was abandoned. Now, The Human Pet was a lot closer to an ARG than Lonely Girl 15 was, but they were both nowhere near as influential as the first ARG I want to properly talk about. Marble Hornets. If you know anything about unfiction, you know about Marble Hornets. It is possibly the most influential ARG of all time, inspiring in some way every other ARG I'll be discussing for this video. As time goes on, more and more ARGs or ARG-inspired projects are less obviously inspired by Marble Hornets, but its influence is still felt to this day. And that's not even getting into how it shaped the Slenderman mythos, because so many concepts introduced in Marble Hornets made their way into other Slenderman projects. Also, yes, for those of you unaware, this is an ARG about Slenderman. Marble Hornets was created only 10 days after the original Slenderman images were posted to the Something Awful forums, and because of that, many of its ideas became canon to the wider Slenderman mythos. There are some differences between the Marble Hornets version of Slenderman. Enough history though, you're here for the story itself. I will be spoiling the entirety of Marble Hornets and every other ARG I talk about, so if that's a problem for you, please do check out the series beforehand. Marble Hornets isn't too long, only about 9.5 hours in length, and it took me about a week to get through it all. If you don't want to commit to the entire series though, at least watch up to entry 26. I'll give you a moment to do that, should you want to. Okay, now I won't be going super in-depth because I don't want this section to be too long, but I will be discussing every major plot point. Let's start with the first upload. Introduction. Introduction introduces us to Jay, who was given a bunch of tapes by his friend Alex Crayley. The tapes were originally from Alex's student film, Marble Hornets, and from now on, unless otherwise stated, whenever I say Marble Hornets, I will be referring to the in-universe film. Now we are shown how Jay got these tapes later, but in this video, we're told that Alex gave them to him since Alex was just going to burn them. Jay says that Alex grew increasingly paranoid and irritable on set, leading to the cancellation of the film. The first entry shows us why, as the Slender Man appears at Alex's house. Although, it is revealed later that Slender Man is referred to as the Operator in this universe, so I will be referring to him as such. Throughout the rest of the series, more strange occurrences happen. Alex gets covered in blood inexplicably, and begins to show symptoms of memory loss and sickness. And as Jay watches the tapes, the same thing happens to him. Jay begins to investigate where Alex went, as a mysterious channel called To the Ark either threatens him or helps him on his investigation. It's never quite clear what To the Ark is trying to do. A strange masked man appears as well, both on the To the Ark channel and in places Jay investigates, and it's pretty clear from the beginning that the masked man is likely Tim, one of the actors from Marble Hornets. The first season, I'll get into that in a moment, ends with Jay giving up on his investigation before finding a box at the hotel room he's staying at, which he's staying at because his apartment burned down. The box contains a tape, which shows Alex, seemingly unaffected by the events of the tapes, being attacked by the Operator, along with a girl that he's seemingly living with. Jay decides to find Alex, and the first season ends. Now, as I said before, Marble Hornets is split into seasons. 3 seasons, to be exact. Season 1 is the shortest, only containing 26 entries, along with their corresponding To the Ark uploads, which are the ARG element of Marble Hornets. Most To the Ark videos contain codes, with their ciphers usually being hinted at on the Marble Hornets Twitter account, which also gave more of an insight into Jay as a character. Each To the Ark video usually contains one central message, such as "look closely," or in the case of entry that, a video uploaded on the Marble Hornets channel by To the Ark, which contains a more in-depth message, seemingly telling Jay that he will lead whoever is behind To the Ark, well, to the Ark. We never learn what the Ark is exactly, but it can be assumed it's something related to the Operator. Season 2 is mostly the same as Season 1, though it starts with the reveal that Jay doesn't remember the last 7 months. He wakes up in a hotel, different from the one at the end of Season 1, and he doesn't recognize the area he's in, nor remember the last 7 months. Season 2 is mostly Jay discovering what happened in those 7 months, as well as his brief interactions with a girl in the hotel named Jessica, who we never learn much about, but Jay's central goal for most of the series is finding her after she's seemingly taken by the Masked Man. Among Jay's discoveries in the second season are the Masked Man indeed being Tim, and there being at least one other person behind the To the Ark channel, dubbed the Hooded Man. Alex returns, as well, helping Jay in order to find Amy, the girl from entry 26, who Alex was with. Though it is revealed at the end of the season that Alex had no desire to actually find Amy, and his real goal was to kill Jay and everyone connected to Marble Hornets, as Alex has seemingly gone insane and become a murderer working with the Operator. Season 2 is by far the weakest season of Marble Hornets, as the plot feels like it goes around in circles until the eventual reveal of Alex being a murderer. Season 2 ends with Jay finding a tape showing that Alex tried to kill him and Jessica, though he was saved by the Masked Man. As Jay and Jessica escape, there's a gunshot heard, but it's unknown for now if anyone was shot. Jay and Jessica check into a hotel, the same one that the season starts in, and seemingly at the very end of entry 52, Jay loses his memories of the last 7 months, leading into entry 27, the start of Season 2. Season 2 also introduces Rosswood Park, a central location that will become important in Season 3, along with a tunnel where Alex commits most of his murders. Tim also gets reintroduced right at the end of Season 2, implying that the Masked Man might be a different persona from his normal self. Season 3 is a lot more complicated than the last two, so I will be going a bit more in depth. Season 3 begins with Jay talking to Tim, and he lies and says he's helping Alex finish Marble Hornets. So, Tim gives him some old footage he had. The footage is all pretty normal, though there's a few strange moments, such as Alex attacking him in entry 56, which does lead back into entry 51 from Season 2, where Tim made an appearance. To the Arc is still uploading, despite Tim's involvement with Jay, which confirms that Tim is not To the Arc, or at least not the sole member. Tim eventually confronts Jay because he looked up the Marble Hornets channel online and found all of the videos. Tim reveals he's been suffering from the sickness that all victims of the operator experience, and he often blacks out and loses a large chunk of memory. This is when he's the masked man, who appears to be less Tim and more of a different entity entirely. We learn more of Tim's backstory later, as he does eventually agree to help Jay, and we learn that he's been experiencing the sickness for almost his whole life. As for To the Arc, it's mostly just cryptic threats in each of the uploads. In entry 61, Jay reveals that 2 hours ago, someone uploaded the video on his account that he's now taken down. The video itself is the hooded man breaking into Tim's house, stealing pills, seemingly forcing him to turn into the masked man. Tim does run away, leading Jay to find him in Rosswood, where he blacks out and wakes up next to him at a shack in the middle of the woods. Later, Tim and Jay meet up and agree to help each other again, and they go back to the shack from entry 52, but there's no evidence of Alex or Tim being shot. They do eventually find the bullet hole in the ceiling. They go to the tunnel where Alex has been murdering people, and Alex calls Jay, saying, "Leave. Now." Tim vanishes, reappears, and entry 65 shows what happened to him, having him be chased by the operator, hallucinating all the while. To the Arc tells Jay to continue on in surveillance, and Jay and Tim go back to the abandoned hospital, which is where Tim was attacked by Alex previously. Tim reveals he used to live in the hospital, confirming that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but he isn't sure how correct that is. Tim worries that what happened to Alex is happening to him, and Jay finds a tape and watches it, with the tape showing the hooded man in the hospital attacking Alex with a metal pipe. Jay and Tim leave town. The hooded man uploads another video to Jay's channel, which contains footage of Alex attacking him. In Decline, we're shown the words, "Everything is fine," along with footage of the hooded man and masked man attacking Alex, with code saying, "He will pay," with the he presumably being Alex. Jay and Tim return to the town from Season 1. They find more tapes. Jay watches them. Some are pretty normal, with the only weird things being the operator showing up. Though in entry 71, we see Alex giving Jay the tapes. Strangely though, Alex attacks Jay, which Jay doesn't remember. He's been forgetting more and more things as the series continues. Tim and Jay go to Alex's old house, now abandoned. They find the operator and Jay blacks out. Entry 73 is another upload from the hooded man, which consists of him looking for more pills. In entry 74, Tim tells Jay that he's been not doing well and that he gave him some of the pills, which improved his condition. Jay, foolishly, does not want any more of the pills, but they go back to Tim's house to get more anyway. There, Jay finds out Tim was keeping information from him on a tape, and Jay gets mad and chooses to stop working with him. In entry 76, we see the masked man take Jessica away to the forest and seemingly watch her die. Jay goes to Tim's house and attacks him with a knife. Tim ties Jay up and starts uploading in his stead. Tim goes to Alex's old college, and the hooded man appears at Tim's house, freeing Jay. Jay follows Tim to the college and is eventually shot by Alex. The operator appears and Jay vanishes, leading Tim to find his camera. All videos uploaded past entry 80 are uploaded by Tim. Entry 81 shows Tim exploring the school prior to Jay following him, and he realizes he's out of pills. At this point, it's clear that the pills do something to counter the operator. After that is Null, the final To the Arc entry. This one contains a code revealing the identity of To the Arc, which is Brian, the lead actor from Marble Hornets. There is also a second part of the code, but unfortunately it's never been solved. In entry 83, Jay is confirmed dead, and Tim kills the hooded man, taking his pills. Tim returns home in entry 84 and finds footage of the casting of Marble Hornets. He notices that Brian is wearing the same hoodie that the hooded man was wearing, confirming that the hooded man was Brian, and therefore that To the Arc was the hooded man. In entry 85, Tim waits for Alex to arrive at his house after calling him out in the last entry. Alex arrives with a gun, so Tim doesn't confront him. He returns to the college, and in Entry 86, they have their final confrontation. Alex blames Tim for everything, even though in reality, the events of the entire series was Alex's fault. Tim eventually kills Alex and collapses, and in Entry 87, Tim talks to Jessica, still alive, and drives off. The final shot of Marble Hornets is text, simply stating, "Everything is fine." And that brings Marble Hornets to a close. Now, there's a lot I didn't go over in detail, but that's why I really do recommend you watch this series for yourself. It cannot be understated how influential Marble Hornets was. Pretty much every ARG from the early 2010s was at least partially influenced by it, from the other Slenderman ARGs, like Everyman Hybrid, Tribe 12, or Dark Harvest 00, to the more unique ARGs. This does bring me to what I like to call the classic era of ARGs, which was roughly 2010 to 2015. Now, Marble Hornets would fall under this era, but I think it deserved its own section. Most ARGs from this time follow the same format as Marble Hornets, with uploads being entries or something along those lines, and usually involving looking through old footage with something spooky going on. There's also usually a second channel owned by the antagonist, with videos threatening the main character, while also containing the actual ARG elements. The next ARG I want to talk about, though, it does more than that. It copies the exact formula, white text on a black background, which informs us of what's going on in the present, then we see footage of the past, and then there's a To The Arc clone threatening the main character. Except unlike Marble Hornets, this one is not very well written. I want you to remember, even though I will be criticizing the hell out of this ARG, I am not saying that it being very clearly inspired by Marble Hornets is a bad thing. I will be comparing the two because of how similar they are, but taking inspiration is not a bad thing. With all that said though, let's take a look at my dad's tapes. Unlike Marble Hornets, my dad's tapes is not very good. I won't be going over the entire series for a couple reasons. One being that most of it seems to be missing, as I'll talk about in a second, and two, it's just a worse version of Marble Hornets. I will say though, I do like that it's a lot more grounded than Marble Hornets, as there aren't really any supernatural elements. But that's about all I can say positively about it. Since I wasn't able to watch all of this series, I had to use other videos about it to get all the details, and I mostly used Nightmind's video as reference. Highly recommend checking out his channel if you're interested in this ARG/unfiction stuff. Enough beating around the bush though. I think it's time I actually discuss the contents of this ARG. My dad's tapes immediately start strong, with a video containing almost no backstory, just the bare minimum. The main character's dad dies, he left behind some tapes. The tapes appear to show someone stalking a woman, but it's clear after a few more tapes that there's multiple women being stalked. Every video has the exact same style as Marble Hornets, that being a black background with white text. Hell, I think it might even be the same font, before we're shown the creepy footage. The format changes a bit in the 10th upload, where the police get involved, and in the 14th entry, we're introduced to Do Not Continue, the To The Arc equivalent of my dad's tapes. Do Not Continue is a lot more overtly antagonistic, and it's pretty clear from the beginning that whoever is behind the channel is following in the footsteps of the killer on the tapes. Also in this video is the introduction of Uncle Don, who was mentioned in the previous video, Entry 13, which was a phone call between the main character and his sister. Uncle Don gives the main character a locked box, with no key. Now it's worth mentioning that every video ends with the main character asking for people to contact him in case anyone knows information, providing an email and a phone number. This email is how Do Not Continue is introduced, and this email is also how we get the next video, where the main character says people have been emailing him, comparing his father to the Zodiac Killer. Now, yes, at this point it is to be assumed that the father is the one on the tapes, but there's no confirmation of it yet. For all we know, he might have been trying to bring the killer on the tapes to justice, but sure. Let's just assume he's the Zodiac Killer. This is the first case of my dad's tapes having questionable writing, but that will be more apparent later. In entry 21, we get white text on a red background, which states that the video was removed and uploaded to Vimeo. Very immersive stuff here, and the reason for this is it's basically a fake. It's do not continue killing an innocent woman because the main character is continuing his investigation, and although it's somewhat convincing, it is still not real. I'm only really saying that so YouTube doesn't throw me into the pits of Tartarus. I'm sure you already knew it wasn't real. This is a major issue with my dad's tapes. A lot of the videos are just missing. Either they were taken down by YouTube and then uploaded to Vimeo, or they're just gone. This is why I had to use Nightmind's video as reference, since otherwise I'd be missing a lot of context. A lot of the Vimeo uploads are just the same thing as entry 21, but they get increasingly edgy and pretentious, and this is really an issue with the series as a whole. So much of it feels like it's just supposed to be shocking for the sake of being shocking, and the rest of the series isn't well written enough to counteract that. Several times, the main character is told to stop what he's doing, either by do not continue murdering people to get him to stop, or by the police directly telling him to stay out of it and let them do their job. There are several times where the main character says something like, "I have to consider the safety of people around me," and then he shows us footage anyway, which adds nothing to the plot. He'll be going on and on about safety, just to show us 17 minutes of the killer looking at a TV with static. There isn't even any reason to go over most of the series since a lot of it is filler. In entry 48 to 50, we see notes from the father's journal. The journal has a whole lot of talk about balance, which returns later, and shortly after this, we learn the main character is named Chris. Do Not Continue eventually kidnaps Chris's girlfriend, who was mentioned in previous entries, and Chris meets up with Do Not Continue so we can find out where his girlfriend is. This leads to one of the most comically bad episodes of a horror web series I've ever seen, where Do Not Continue and Chris get margaritas and basically nothing else happens.
It's a damn good margarita.
This is the point where it's apparent most of the actors can't act worth a damn. Marble Hornets didn't have great actors either, but at least the writing was decent, and at least the actors were somewhat competent, and got better over time. Here though, the writing is shit, and it's only getting worse. A few videos later, Chris meets with Do Not Continue again, at Uncle Don's house, where there's a whole bunch of other serial killers just so he can rescue his girlfriend. Chris brings no protection. He doesn't bring a weapon, and he doesn't tell the police. Sure, the killers are standing there in broad daylight, super obviously, but that doesn't matter. They're gonna kill him anyway. Of course, it turns out that Uncle Don was the mastermind all along. It turns out he was the killer on the tapes, not Gerald, the father, but Gerald did kill some people. Uncle Don goes on and on about the inheritance and balance and tries to get Chris to join him and also kill him, but Chris doesn't do it. So, the killers bury his girlfriend alive. After the Uncle Don reveal, my dad's tapes falls off hard. The series ends abruptly at entry 88, with no real ending, and the only plot development is that one of the first girls on the tapes survived. My dad's tapes is bad. I'm sorry. It just is. I'm sure the people behind it tried, but it's just so poorly written and acted out that I just can't call it anything other than bad. The idea behind it is cool, and I do like that they bothered to actually put all of this stuff on real VHS tapes, but the majority of this series is just trying so hard to be Marble Hornets, but without the good writing and world building Marble Hornets had. My dad's tapes is repetitive, it's overly edgy, and it's way too long. Unfortunately, this is the fate of a lot of ARGs from this time period. They either continue way too long, becoming a shell of their former self, like my dad's tapes, or they get cancelled prematurely, like the next ARG I want to talk about. Now, much like my dad's tapes, Found on the Tape started in 2011, and is themed around VHS tapes. However, I do think it is a lot better, despite its extremely short length. I wanted to talk about it for two reasons. One, to give an example of an ARG from the classic era that's actually decent, and two, I wanted to showcase the direction ARGs began to take. So, with Marble Hornets and many of its imitators, the main channel consisted of found footage style videos, with there being one more channel attached to it containing the actual ARG. However, Found on the Tape is only the Cryptic ARG channel. There's only 3 videos here, and they're all pretty short, so I'll be going into these more in depth. The first video is clip 94, which starts off with a blue screen with a VHS filter. The video eventually starts proper, and we see blurry, shaky footage of someone from the waist down, followed by footage of someone inserting a tape into a VHS player. Then we see footage of people in an elevator, followed by cuts between the person standing at the start of the video and the elevator. Then we cut to a woman talking, and then the camera pans to this, a seemingly decapitated head in what looks like a stairway with blood dripping from it. The camera zooms into the face, and then cuts back to the person standing, and then the video ends. Next is clip 95, which starts with the same blue screen, then the same footage of a person standing. There's footage of a man whose face is extremely bright, and it appears he doesn't know he's being filmed. There's footage of what I think is a porch, followed by a code which leads to the actual ARG content, but I'll get to that later. The video continues with an armless thing walking towards the camera, with a single frame of it being really close to the camera. Then we see another armless thing, then we see the guy who doesn't know he's being filmed again. The video ends there. Now, as I said earlier, ARG proper begins with the code in the last video, which leads to a Half-Life 2 map. Yes, a Half-Life 2 map. Now, I didn't play any of these maps for the video, and I ended up just using Nightmind's video about this ARG as reference, since he already did a pretty in-depth look, and this ARG is so old at this point that most of this info, like some community posts and the links to the maps, are now gone. The first map is nothing all that interesting, just a room that you can't move in and all. If you make it so you can move, if you try to open the door, you get jump scared by the face from clip 94 before the game crashes. Now, the second map wasn't accessed from video, but from a channel comment saying to not trust any other sources before being interrupted by a hex code leading to an email which had a link to the map. This map is much more interesting, as the player is trapped in vents, like Among Us. Eventually a hatch can be found, which causes a cave-in, though that might only happen when you turn around, I'm not sure. You can either let yourself get killed by the cave-in, which isn't directly seen because the game crashes when a charred corpse appears, or you can hide, allowing you to go to a bloody drop in the vents, which also kills you. Before we get to the final video, there's another map to discuss. This one was accessed by getting a link to it from an email attached to the channel, with only 10 people receiving the email. The map is more of the same, the vents are just taller now. This eventually brings you to a lower level, which brings you to vents, like in the previous map. These vents are littered with bodies and blood, and they once more lead to death. The final video on the channel is clip 84, which starts with the blue screen, but then shows fog, I think? I don't know, honestly. It's really hard to tell with how low quality it is. Then there's what I think is a tunnel, which is the only footage not in black and white, followed by a triangular thing, which according to this comment on Nightmind's video, is a prelator, a piece of farming equipment. Now, I looked that up and I can't find anything mentioning a prelator being farming equipment, so please take that with a grain of salt.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
Anyway, the video continues with footage of what I think is a cave. I genuinely have no clue what the footage shown after is, and if you have any idea, please let me know in the comments. It cuts back to the triangle thing with another code that's still unsolved to this day. Then we see what looks like a map for underground tunnels, possibly the one we were shown footage of earlier. There's more footage that is incomprehensible to me, followed by one frame of another armless creature. The video ends there, but there's one more map, which was accessed by a binary code left on the channel page. The map is more vents, with a section requiring boxes that needed to be moved, and more falls, but these ones aren't fatal. The vents become bloody, there's an uphill section with some burned corpses, and eventually the player arrives in a flooded area filled with boxes. The map ends with the creature killing the player, which, if the found on the tape wiki is to be believed, is this armless creature, much like the ones in the videos. And that brings Found on the Tape to a close. This ARG is weird, and unfortunately we'll probably never get any answers for what it means, since it's been 13 years with no updates. I think the only real concrete plot that can be assumed is that the armless creatures were important, considering they made 3 different appearances across the videos and maps. As interesting as Found on the Tape is, I do have to admit it is maybe a little bit too cryptic. There's no context for the videos at all, and there's no further information on the channel whatsoever. This, unfortunately, became the norm for ARGs in the mid-2010s, but before we get to that, I want to discuss another classic ARG that I, unfortunately, just don't really have the time to get into fully. Alan Tutorial was a web series created by Alan Resnick, where he plays a fictional version of himself, creating what appears to be, at first, absurd parodies of tutorial videos, but eventually a much darker story is revealed. Alan Tutorial is great. I really wish I had the time to discuss it further, and maybe I will someday, but unfortunately, it's barely an ARG. It's really more of an unfiction thing, and besides, this video is long enough already. I did want to at least mention Alan Tutorial though, because it was quite influential, just nowhere near as much as Marble Hornets. I really hate to keep comparing things to Marble Hornets, but it really was just the catalyst for most ARGs being created, even if they weren't directly influenced by it. Anyway, Alan Tutorial is great, check it out sometime, and check out unedited footage of a bear, and This House Has People in It, which were also created by Alan Resnick, and are a lot more of ARGs than Alan Tutorial. But now, it's time to talk about the mid-2010s, which is when I would say ARGs started to get oversaturated. Not necessarily bad, but there was just too many of them. This is about the time I found out about them via channels like Nightmind and Scare Theater, and you can tell a lot of ARGs from this era were made by younger people, with the intent of being shown on one of those channels. Now I do want to say, there is nothing wrong with creating something for the sake of attention, and if anything I've talked about, or will talk about here today, inspires you, please, go out and create something. It might suck, but everybody sucks at first. However, as I'll talk about later, attention seeking can be an issue, though not for our next subject. I consider this one to be the bridge between the classic era and the oversaturation of the mid-2010s. I want you all to remember during this section that not all ARGs released in the mid-2010s were bad. Not all of them were made by teenagers who just wanted to be covered by their favorite YouTubers, and some of them were classics in their own right, like Meatsleep. Chances are you've heard of Meatsleep before, since it is one of the more famous ARGs, up there with the likes of Marble Hornets and Alan Tutorial, but unlike those two, I have no fucking idea what to say about Meatsleep. I'm sorry, but this one is just too weird. Sure, Found on the Tape was weird, but it was only 3 videos, and clearly got cancelled prematurely. Meatsleep is a full ARG, with over 90 videos, all full of shit like this. What do I even say about this? I'm not saying Meatsleep is bad or anything, far from it. I think it's extremely interesting, but I just do not have the time to watch 90 videos of abstract, creepy visuals with no plot at all. Seriously, I have no idea what it's even about. I remember theories that it was about cannibals or a serial killer or a cannibalistic serial killer, but from what I watched, there's not much evidence of that. I did only watch the first 5 uploads, and I will be discussing those, but sorry, I just can't go into this one in full. It's too weird. The first upload is 4-9, and immediately we're given a great example of just how bizarre this channel was. The video consists of creepy audio which sounds almost like Morse code. Footage of a bathroom door closing, at one point there's footage of a computer screen with highlighted letters, followed by a jump scare of an eyeball. There's a creepy music box at one point and audio of someone talking, and I have zero clue what any of it means. The next video is more borderline incomprehensible stuff, mostly containing footage of a hospital. And after that is Ingrate, the most well-known upload on the channel. This one contains creepy audio of loud noises, and the text-to-speech voice saying stuff like, "ARGs, you are at home." And the footage is mostly of someone in a basement, seemingly kidnapped. There's a weird pair of eyes at the end too, which looks kind of like a cat. I don't know, man. I'm sorry, I really am, but I have no idea how to talk about this channel. Unfortunately, this is just how ARGs were at this point. At least now, the codes usually actually went somewhere, but so many ARGs from this time period were just extremely cryptic with barely any plot. The last 2 uploads I watched were more of the same, and from what I can understand, Meatsleep's plot is just that it's maybe a serial killer uploading the videos, which isn't a problem at all. Clearly, the creators were going for cryptic, since the whole idea was to make it unclear if it was real or not, but at least the crypticness of stuff like "to the arc and do not continue," even if not always great, usually had an identifiable purpose. This is just weird. Unfortunately, because of how weird and cryptic Meatsleep was, combined with the ambiguity of if it was real or not, harassment eventually got sent the way of the channel, unfortunately leading to the cancellation of the series and the deletion of all the videos. I do want to reiterate, I do not hate Meatsleep. I think for what it is, it's interesting. I just don't get it. If I decided to devote the time to understanding it, I'm sure I'd have a whole lot more to say about it, but I don't really have the time to do that, so I'm just gonna move on to the next ARG. And this, my friends, this is the perfect example of a bad ARG. Take the overly edgy and cryptic ARG tropes from this era and combine it with the overly long length of my dad's tapes, and you get Cave of Shadows. Now I will say, this isn't all bad. The idea behind it is somewhat interesting, that being an old TV channel which broadcasted less than normal programming, but that is also just Local 58. As you'll soon see, that's not the only thing Cave of Shadows directly lifted from another ARG, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Cave of Shadows, otherwise known as The System, was split into 4 different channels. The titular Cave of Shadows, NS0, MNBY, which I'll just refer to as Zombie from now on, Elias Doyle, and Awake. I'll be starting with Cave of Shadows, then discussing the other 3 channels when relevant. The first video is a pretty simple introduction video with nothing really going on. This leads into broadcast number 1, which starts off exactly the same as the welcome video, but then we're given a word from the Overwatcher. Now, I know the art for the Overwatcher is not very good, but I'm going to cut them some slack. I feel like maybe this was on purpose. The crude artwork adds to the very amateur, low-budget feel that they were going for, which is another thing that I do like about this series. The Overwatcher's message isn't really important. We're shown creepy footage of a forest, and then we cut back to the Overwatcher and it zooms in for no reason. We're going to be seeing this kind of thing a lot. Next, we get You Know More, and this is just an actual documentary. This has no bearing on the plot. Next is a Mr. Giraffe, which is just someone making a video with a giraffe hand puppet, which ends with him stabbing himself with scissors. Next is Weather Forecast, which goes on way too long, and is interrupted by Base64 text saying, "The Overwatcher stopped watching the broadcast. I need to confirm this is a good way to communicate privately. We need to wait until the next broadcast to relay any serious information." Keep this in mind for later. Next is Relaxation, which is just stock footage with affirming messages. Finally, closing remarks is just that. Closing remarks. You'll notice I skipped through a decent chunk of that 20-minute video because nothing happens. This is the main problem with Cave of Shadows. The main videos are all pretty long, but half of their content is pointless filler. This will only become more of a problem later. Now yes, other ARGs did this too. Many of Marble Hornets' later episodes were 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes even 20 minutes, but those all served a purpose. If there wasn't something important happening, there was tension and atmosphere being built. Here though, there's no purpose to all the filler. It's just that, filler. Let's move on to the next upload, which is an apology for the delay between broadcasts. Cave of Shadows was on the schedule of uploading every second Friday of every month, but as far as I'm aware, they never followed this schedule. The word decode shows up at the end, but there's nothing to decode. You can brighten the image to get a symbol, but again, there's nothing to decode. Broadcast 2 is more of the same. We start with the Overwatcher begging for money, we get another actual documentary for You Know More, we get another edgy Mr. Draft segment ending with him being impaled by a stick, and then we get weather forecast. Now remember, last time we saw weather forecast, we got some coded messages from someone going against the system. So this time, we should learn what that was about.
You serious?
Okay, so I guess that went nowhere. Next we get Blank Room, which introduces the concept of somnum, and then we see someone sleeping. This is a clever reference to somnum being Latin for sleep. This never comes up again in the entire ARG. Next is relaxation, which is more of what we saw last time. After that is orientation, which has base 64 messages like, there are voices in the water, and he sees everything. I am not reading that wrong, it says he sees everything. Also, guess what? The voices in the water never show up again. That's just another vaguely mysterious thing that never gets brought up again. The video ends with the usual send-off, followed by more code, which leads to a shady-ass website that I am not downloading anything from. Thankfully, I don't have to. As I've implied already, Cave of Shadows really wanted attention, specifically from two YouTubers, Scare Theater and Nightmind. Now, Nightmind never covered this ARG, which I can see why, but Scare Theater did end up covering it, at least partially. In his video, he shows that the website led to a game called Experience 1. The game is pretty much pointless, and all that's really worth mentioning is this end screen that says, he knows where you are now, and this end screen which says, Contragulations, as well as giving us the number 36. The 36 will be important for the next video, which is also called Congratulations. This video contains more numbers, revealing a coordinate when combined with the 36 from Experience 1, and two more numbers that we get later. This coordinate, according to this comment from Elias Doyle, is 3 hours away from his house. Elias Doyle, as I said before, was one of the channels that was part of this ARG, and this is just Marble Hornets. All of Elias Doyle's videos are very clearly inspired by the investigation videos from Marble Hornets, except they're way too long, and the guy in them cannot act. I won't be discussing the videos on this channel in depth because I don't want to, and besides, they aren't all that important anyway. Back to Cave of Shadows. Broadcast 3 begins with the Overwatcher saying some stuff about how people are betraying the system, and then You Know More is footage of a sock puppet saying he's a car salesman? Mr. Draft is next. He walks around a suburb and dies, and the camera holds on his dead body for way too long. Next is weather forecast, removed by the Overwatcher. Why is this even here? Next is story time, which is certainly something. Zombie appears, but we learn later this is not the one narrating. The story is about a penguin named Penguin, and it's pretty normal until the end where this happens.
Especially Penguin's favorite when, long after the game ended, he took him into the little boy's room and helped him.
That was really bad.
And this is where Cave of Shadows goes from just being okay to downright bad. There is no reason for this to be in the video other than shock value, and using implied for shock value, is fucking stupid. If it was a more important aspect of the story, then sure, I could look past it. Plenty of media handles those themes just fine. But here though, there's no purpose. Just shock value. But this isn't even the worst offender of pointless shock value in this ARG. No, that'll come later. Next is radio, which is literally pointless filler. And then we get relaxation, which is also filler, aside from the message, "You can trust us." And then finally, we get closing remarks, followed by someone in a mask, and check the experience. This is clearly telling us to check experience 1, and using the password 3, which appeared earlier in the video, which leads to another video which gives us the password system, gives us another part of the coordinates mentioned earlier. We'll see how the fourth part is found later, but it doesn't matter anyway since we already know what it leads to. Broadcast 4, because with the Overwatcher having a new appearance. All he does is thank the viewers for 1,000 subscribers. Next is You Know More, it's a sock puppet again, and the only thing of note is 1991 being visible at one point. Keep this in mind for later. There's some cryptic text, followed by Mr. Giraffe. Mr. Giraffe dies again, and next is story time. I think the penguin is kidnapped? This goes nowhere, but I think this is supposed to be foreshadowing. Next is Blank Room, which I think is someone just trapped in a room. And next is Zombie, introducing us to the new segment, Loose Lips Sink Ships, which is animated and has literally no impact on the plot. Next is Relaxation, which is just, "You can trust us." And then we get a very special presentation. This is just To The Arc. This is just a To The Arc video. It does introduce us to Skeeve, the man behind the Mr. Giraffe segments, and seemingly the main antagonist of the series. But this is just To The Arc. And you know what's really annoying about this segment? The fact that all the text is tiny, red text on the bottom left of the screen, making it really hard to read. Anyway, he gives the fourth part of the coordinate to Elias Doyle, and then closing remarks happens, and it's completely normal. It's at this point where any interesting ideas the series has are just thrown out the window for edgy bullshit, because Broadcast 5 is next, and is pretty much just Skeeve taking over the channel to mess with Elias. The intro is interrupted by footage from Skeeve of him stalking Elias. You Know More is more weird sock puppet stuff that I think has no impact to the plot, though we do see audio skin scored at one point. Skin scored. I don't know if that's an intentional typo or not, but either way, next is Mr. Giraffe, which isn't even Mr. Giraffe, it's Zombie walking around a forest while Smashing Pumpkins plays. Storytime mentions someone named Harlequin80, which maybe that showed up before? I don't know. I don't care. I really do not care. This ARG is so fucking boring. I'm not watching every single video just to find that out. Penguin kills himself, I think. Special presentation is split into two parts. Elias got kidnapped by Skeeve, who, guess what, also can't act, and we get to vote if he lives or dies. Elias lives. Closing remarks is some radio transmissions followed by a normal outro. Oh, well, we're not done. Next is Where Are They Now, which shows an abandoned school, which is likely the system's hideout. This video clearly wasn't uploaded by the system, but it doesn't matter anyway, because this is the end of the ARG. There is one more video called Flashback, which shows Skeeve seemingly dead in the forest, and this ties into the Elias Doyle upload, The Forest, which is the final upload in the ARG, so I'd hardly count this as a proper Cave of Shadows upload. So now's a good time to go over the other two channels, Awake and Zombie. I'll start with Awake because it's not up anymore. I don't know what happened since sources vary, but either the channel got hacked and deleted or just deleted. The only evidence of it ever existing is Scare Theater's video, and from what I can see in that video, this is just To The Arc, except there's pretty much no purpose to it. This is like if To The Arc was just uploading the videos for no reason other than to just be weird. So that just leaves Zombie, which does have most of its videos deleted. The videos that are still up are pretty uneventful, just footage of Zombie walking around with music playing, usually from the 2000s. One of the videos is literally just a lyric video for Deftones' song Change in the House of Flies, which is a great song, don't get me wrong, but what does this have to do with the ARG? Now, as for the videos no longer on the channel, they're just Meatsleep, except without the mystique of not knowing if it's real or not. But that's not the worst part of Zombie. No. There's two things I need to mention here. First, the attention seeking, which I've already talked about, most notably in a password for part of the ARG, literally being Scare Theater Nightmind, and finally, the use of an actual missing child in the ARG. Zombie is often shown to be in British Columbia, and makes frequent reference to Michael Donaghy, an actual missing child from the same area, and one of Canada's most famous missing children. Remember how I said to keep 1991 in mind? That's the year he went missing, and it's heavily implied that either he is Michael Donaghy, or was involved in his disappearance. Now it's worth mentioning that Michael Donaghy, the real person, is still missing. To this day. I can't excuse that. Using implied CSA for shock value, plus using an actual, real-life missing persons case as part of your shitty ARG, is just dumb. I don't think I should have to say to not do this, but don't do this. Now, yes, obviously Cave of Shadows was made by a bunch of inexperienced teenagers, and considering it's been 8 years, Jesus Christ, since the ARG started and ended, I'd really hope its creators have moved on and made better things, but Cave of Shadows still sucks. There were other bad ARGs in the mid-2010s, don't get me wrong, but Cave of Shadows hands down has to be one of the worst ARGs ever created. Don't let anything I've said in this segment discourage you. If you want to make an ARG, do it. Just don't do what Cave of Shadows did. I want to end this video off by talking about modern day ARGs, as despite it all, ARGs are still a thing, just not as big as they once were. See, a lot of ARGs now are just analog horror. Sure, they usually only have ARG elements, but it's clear that a lot of them are heavily inspired by the ARGs of the past, and I think this can be seen even in what is widely considered the first analog horror series, Local 58. I won't be going in depth on Local 58 here, because I fully intend on making a video about it in the future, but I'd say it definitely has a lot more in common with ARGs than one would think. So much so that it can be considered the gap between alternate reality games and analog horror. Despite that though, it really isn't an ARG. At best, Local 58 just has ARG elements, but it's really more of an unfiction thing. That can be argued for the next series I want to talk about as well, but first, I want to talk about what else has been done with the ARG formula in recent years, and how much more creative it is now. First, we have Welcome Home. I don't know much about this one, honestly. All I know is that it's mostly on a website, which isn't fully unique, but at least that hasn't been done in a while. From what I understand, Welcome Home is about a lost TV show, the titular Welcome Home, that was basically Sesame Street, but there was some shady stuff behind the scenes, as expected for an ARG like this. Now the second ARG I want to highlight here is, as far as I'm aware, part of a larger analog horror project, but I really want to talk about it for one reason. It's a playable video game. I know even less about Shipwreck 64 than I do about Welcome Home. All I know is it's part of a larger project that doesn't seem to have much ARG elements, but I do know that Shipwreck 64 specifically does contain ARG elements. I'm sure there's already plenty of videos talking about it in more detail, but I think it's really cool for an ARG to be inside of an actual playable video game. With those two projects out of the way, I want to move over to a much more interesting topic to me, that being an ARG based on Garry's Mod. Yes, a Gmod ARG. If you somehow don't know what Gmod is, it's a mod for Half-Life 2, which turns it into a sandbox game, and is most known for being possibly one of the funniest games ever created. Now while this ARG isn't an overly unique concept today, at the time that it started, nearly 5 years ago at this point, it was certainly more unique. Classic GM Videos is a pioneer, and I think it's worth talking about for that reason alone. Of course, this series is still ongoing, so I'll only be discussing what's out as of now. As of me recording this, there are 53 uploads on the Classic GM Videos channel, and a good chunk of them are normal Garry's Mod videos, so I will be going over those quickly. If you want a more in-depth look at this series, Rector Overtime has a couple great videos about it, and I highly recommend them. The first video on the Classic GM Videos channel is a normal Gmod skit called G-Man's Day Out, and while it has no real bearing on the ARG, it's still a fun video that is worth watching. Next is a few more normal videos, but in Misc Recording 1, we can just barely see a shadowy figure in a doorway. Next is Graveyard Secret, which is mostly normal, aside from the ending. In the next video, G-Man's Day Out behind the scenes, we see the player frantically running around, seemingly trying to find the shadowy figure, which I will now refer to as the Entity for simplicity. That name isn't official at all, by the way, I just have no idea what else to call it. This video also has a pinned comment from the uploader, mentioning someone named Skizzy, who will be mentioned many times throughout the series. Misc Recording 2 is more frantic footage of the player looking for the Entity, and after that is a now deleted, but thankfully re-uploaded video called Half-Life 2 0000000, which had the description never upload, as opposed to the usual original upload date or never uploaded. In this video, the player is killed and spawns in the dark room on the map GM Construct. Now, the dark room has been subject to rumors and creepypastas for almost as long as it's been in the game, so it should come as no surprise that it seems to be the focus of this series. The player navigates the dark room, and a figure different from the Entity, at least I assume, appears, and the player panics and closes the game, which is incredibly realistic, honestly, and I have to give props to the makers of the series for that. Next is two normal Gmod videos, with this one titled G-Man Metal Band being made by Skizzy, and the description says, upload for Skizzy. Side note, I love this video. It does such a great job of recapturing the feel of old Gmod videos, and the attention to detail in this series in general is great. As I already said, the next video after this is normal, and after this is Zombie Killer. There isn't anything outwardly weird about this one, it's just heavily corrupted. And now, we get to an interesting one. Pond Abyss shows that the pond in GM Construct, which is usually pretty shallow, is seemingly bottomless. Next is another normal Gmod video, and then we get seemingly the same video, but with some corruption. And seemingly at the end, the player sees something and runs away. Next is a few normal videos, followed by expedition attempts. This video is of the player investigating the pond, which keeps teleporting them and making loud noises whenever an item is dropped into it. Almost like the ragdoll sound. Next is Expedition 2, where the player investigates further and teleports into the dark room, where they get scared and close the game. Next is Test, which I don't think was uploaded on purpose, in universe anyway. It's mostly normal, but the Entity does appear briefly. Next is another interesting one, Half-Life 2 Nova Prospect Weird/Creepy Hidden Area. Now this is interesting because this area doesn't exist. I've never played Half-Life 2 despite owning it for a while now, but if the comments are to be believed, this isn't in the game. Anyway, next is another normal Gmod. Oh, never mind. And after this is an actually normal Gmod skit. Then we get an update on the Nova Prospect Easter egg, with the radio now saying numbers. We learn in the next video that these are Gmod coordinates, which the player types into the console and is teleported to a dark room. They're trapped and disconnect from the game. Next is Half-Life 2 Cool Sad Area, which shows a real Easter egg from Half-Life 2, as far as I'm aware. After that is another vaguely creepy video that doesn't really have much to it, and then a normal video, and then another vaguely creepy video of two ragdolls being sent into the dark room. This is pretty clearly a continuation of the last one. The only other thing of note is some distortion at the end, which looks vaguely like a hand grabbing the camera, but I could also just be insane. Next is another normal skit, then a map showcase with nothing weird aside from distortion at one point, and the fact that the map does not exist. Well, it does exist now, considering there's several recreations of it, but they all either mention being recreations or being from an old hard drive, despite no evidence of them ever existing prior. Next is some more weird footage, with the player clearly being freaked out. Then we get 2 more normal videos, with one being created by Skizzy. Next is Car Test, which was not created by Skizzy, and is mostly normal, aside from these 2 zombies stacked on top of each other, which suggests that the player was not alone when they recorded this. Considering their confusion, I doubt they were playing on a server. Next is a normal video, Half-Life 2 Ragdoll Dance Bug, but this one is considerably lower quality, and the description also says oldest instead of the usual old or older in the file directory. This leads me to believe that this is the first video in the timeline, or at least one of the oldest videos in the timeline. Again though, this video is normal, so I'm going to move on to the next one, which is less than normal. After the Ragdoll Dance Bug, the channel went dormant for 2 years, but a few months ago, this video was uploaded. Creepy Half-Life 2 Glitch. This video is weird. It's just normal footage of Half-Life 2, except every single NPC is constantly staring at the player, no matter how far away they are. Next is clip 3, which follows up from the last video, and now every NPC is ignoring the player, walking away from them while still staring at them. And then, after that, we get G-Man's Other Day Out, which is just a normal silly Gmod animation. Next is Half-Life 2 Hidden Zombie, which shows a real Half-Life 2 secret, but with one change: this zombie. Next is Root, one of the creepiest videos in the whole series. It starts with the player investigating a dark room, and they keep pausing the game for unknown reasons. Eventually, they encounter a large mass of textures which seriously lags the game, and they eventually close the game entirely. Now, while Root isn't explicitly scary, it does have an excellent atmosphere, and raises a ton of questions about where the story is headed. After Root is a normal skit titled Moving Day Again, which contains some flashbacks to videos that appear to have not been uploaded yet. And then, we get Half-Life 2 House of Horrors map playthrough. This video is pretty normal, with the only weird thing being that the game crashes after the player shoots a ghost, and that they seem to hesitate when shooting G-Man at the end, despite not hesitating to shoot any other NPCs. This one is a real map from 2006, so this isn't another case of a map being made for the ARG. This one is real. Next is Combine Infiltration, which is another skit, but I love this one. I've not been talking about the skits much, but they are a lot of fun. They really capture the feel of old Gmod skits perfectly, and I wouldn't be surprised if Classic GM Videos was created just so the creator would have an excuse to make some Gmod machinimas. After that though, we're back to the creepy shit, with Half-Life 2, New Creepy Easter Egg in Ravenholm. This video is mostly setup, and the Easter egg is just another radio. Since this is one of the newer uploads, this hasn't gone anywhere yet. Next is a normal video created by Skizzy, then another video by Skizzy where he checks for the entity in GM constructs, but finds nothing. This leads to possibly the best video in the whole series, Zombie Bowling Test. It seems like things are finally normal. Classic GM Videos is finally back to playing Gmod normally, but just when the false sense of security sets in, this happens. The entity only appears on screen for about 1 second, but this is genuinely excellent horror. Before this, the entity last appeared in Expedition 2, which was uploaded almost 4 years before Zombie Bowling Test. Obviously less time passed in universe, but still, 4 years of constant paranoia, looking for the entity constantly in every single video, before finally showing that it appears to be gone in the previous video, only to do this. beautiful. Next is another normal video, but at one point, one of the characters looks like the entity. Next is Flood, where GM Construct is flooded. The player almost leaves the game, but chooses to investigate instead. The description, most likely directed at Skizzy, is a lot more angry than usual. Next is Pond Bottom, which is basically the same, but ends with the player arriving in what looks like the area from Root, with some video distortion at the end. Next is a normal video, but after that, we arrive at the latest upload, Investigation Construct 2. This video is interesting because for once, another player appears, Skizzy. We see Skizzy in classic GM videos talk and chat, but because of how blurry the video is, it's almost impossible to make out. Thankfully, this comment contains most of what the messages say, but none of it's really that important. The comment also says that Classic GM Video's name is Astra, but I have no goddamn clue how they were able to figure that out. As for the video itself, it's just Classic GM Videos and Skizzy investigating GM constructs, but finding nothing. We'll have to wait to see how this turns out. Even though I did go over the entire series, I only scratched the surface here. There's a whole lot more to uncover, but I think that's best saved for another time. Maybe in the future when more of the ARG is out, I'll make another video going over it in further depth. But for now, that's all I have to say. It is worth mentioning that of all the series I talked about for this video, Classic GM Videos is by far the least ARG-esque. There's not really any puzzles or audience participation, but there isn't much in Marble Hornets or My Dad's tapes either, so make of that what you will. I'm still including it here because it's my video, I can do that, and also, I wanted to show how unique it is in the ARG landscape. At least if you ignore the other Gmod ARGs that do basically the same thing. All in all, Classic GM Videos is a very interesting series, and I'm actually excited to see where it heads next. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of this video. There are many more ARGs I could have talked about, but this video is long enough as is. Consider this video a brief history of the alternate reality game, rather than an in-depth guide to the medium as a whole. There are a few more I want to talk about, but I'll likely be giving those their own videos, since I have a whole lot more to say about them. If there's anything to be learned from this video, it's that even if they're less popular now, ARGs are still very much alive. Sure, they got a bit oversaturated in the mid-2010s, but actually interesting things are being done with the medium now, instead of just ripping off Marble Hornets for the millionth time. That isn't to say Marble Hornets is the most original series ever created, or that every ARG back then was a shameless Marble Hornets ripoff, but as I said at the start of this video, ARGs are becoming less and less obviously inspired by it. Nowadays, it does seem like analog horror is the primary form of YouTube horror content, and plenty of analog horror series have taken inspiration from ARGs. Unfortunately though, it does seem like analog horror is already getting oversaturated, as over the past year or so, I've been seeing a lot more people talking about the death of analog horror, or the fall of analog horror, but hey, that's just a cycle of horror on the internet. A new, interesting medium gets created, it gets oversaturated, and people move on to the next one. It happened with creepypasta, it happened with ARGs, and now it's happening to analog horror. But just because analog horror may be in a decline now, it may one day have a revival, like ARGs today. I want you to remember one thing from this video, and that is that making things is hard. Unfiction, especially, takes a lot of work to make something good, and just because you make something bad on your first attempt, that doesn't mean you'll never make anything good. I've been struggling a lot with making this video, going through several rewrites because I worried the script wasn't good enough, that it was too incoherent, too rambly, too long, too short, and so on and so forth. I mean, maybe it is. The point I'm trying to make, though, is just because you see issues with your work, others may not. It's good to be critical of your work, but worrying too much about what others may think will lead you to never releasing it in the first place. So, If you've ever thought about making an ARG, or anything really, remember, it's hard. You're probably not going to make a perfect series, but every piece of art has its problems, including the ones I praised here today. Just, please, for the love of God, if you're going to make an ARG, don't do what Cave of Shadows did. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and good night.